On today's edition of the Thrive Time Show, we interview Arizona Congressman Paul Gosar as we uncover the corruption of the 2020 presidential election and the difference between what an affidavit is and an accusation. Thrive Nation, on today's show, I'm excited, I'm delighted, and you're invited to check out today's show notes because we found out that the election software that is used throughout these great United States during elections to tabulate the number of votes just happens to be made by the Clinton Foundation. Yes, the Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation. Oh, and we just happened to discover today that program is called Dominion, meaning control. And we just discovered, check this out, this is going to blow your mind. We found out that the program in error accidentally deleted 2.7 million Donald J. Trump for president votes while switching 221,000 Pennsylvania votes from Donald J. Trump to Joe Biden by accident. Oh, and they deleted 941,000 Trump votes accidentally. Ladies and gentlemen, on today's show, we're going to expose the fraud of the 2020 presidential election. We're going to talk about widespread mail-in ballots, the corruption of backdating ballots, ballot harvesting, and the mass trashing of your ballots. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, this news is encouraging if you love President Donald J. Trump, and it's discouraging if you thought that the elections would be free from fraud. All this and more on today's interview in addition to the Thrive Time Show featuring Arizona Congressman Paul Gosar.
Some shows don't need a celebrity narrator to introduce the show, but this show does. 2 men, 8 kids, co-created by 2 different women, 13 multi-million-dollar businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thrive Time Show.
Now, 3, 2, 1, here we go!
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. We started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we'll show you how to get
Yes, and yes. Thrive Nation, I am excited because we have good news, and the truth shall set us free. I know there's 500,000 of you that listen to each and every one of these shows, and you are kind of held in this state of worry. Some of you are fretting. You're wondering what's going to happen in Arizona. I've talked to so many of you that live in Arizona who've wondered what's going on with the election, what's going on with the ballots. And so we wanted to interview somebody who has a little inside scoop as to what's going on, who can reassure us about this election and how it might turn out there. So Congressman Paul Gosar, welcome on to the Thrive Time Show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Clay. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, quick background, just because I'm assuming that most of our listeners maybe don't know a whole lot about you. What was your background previous to deciding to put your career on hold and pursue politics, where I understand no good deed goes unpunished?
Yeah, once upon a time, I was a micro miner called a dentist.
Micro miner called a dentist. Okay, and what made you decide to get involved in politics?
Well, I got tired of not having my voice heard, and I was tired of having my representative not listen. And, all good ideas, the complaints come from people on the ground. But if you sit down and wait with them, they'll tell you what the solution is, too. And so I decided I was tired of that, and, here I am.
How old were you when you first got involved in politics?
Pretty young.
Okay.
My mom and dad always were involved in politics. They always told us you got to be involved. So we have a very dynamic family. There's like 7 of my siblings are extremely liberal.
Oh, wow.
And there's 2 of us that are pretty conservative and 1 that stays on the sidelines. He's tired of the fighting. So, but we started very early.
So let's talk about this. To give listeners some context, you've been involved in politics. You've seen politics for many years. You appear to be in your early 20s there, but I know you've been on the planet for a while. Is this the craziest election process you've ever witnessed, or the wildest, or just give, because a lot of people maybe aren't familiar with how elections should work. Is this one of the oddest election processes you've ever seen?
It's odd and troubling, really deeply troubling to see the amount of disgraceful protocols used to take down a president. They knew that this president was going to be popular. They just didn't estimate how popular he was going to be. So they've actually gone out and done everything from getting 90-year-olds who haven't voted, having a big spike in number of 90-year-olds that actually register to vote for the first time. That's kind of unusual. And then, women that have their maiden names, all of a sudden there's votes cast in their maiden names. So something's wrong with this, particularly in Arizona, when we saw such an appetite for this president. I mean, this president came to my district 4 times, Clay, twice to Yuma, once to Prescott, and once to Bullhead City. And there were tens of thousands of people there. I mean, bigger than some of these towns were. And people were coming all over. Yeah. So we just don't see how this matches up with the results.
Well, interesting information. I'm not going to ask you to comment on this necessarily, but I am going to share it with you so you can vet it and research it on your own. We have thousands of people who are emailing us information. And just as an example, most of Biden's 221,000 vote margin gain in Georgia was in 3 counties that received $15 million from Mark Zuckerberg-funded Safe Elections Project, the Safe Elections Project. Or when you look at the software that is used to count the votes, there are a lot of ties to the Clinton Foundation, and I could go on, and it's all cited there, and I want all of our listeners to not believe a single thing that I'm saying. I want them to do their research, but I'm putting all the links so people can verify and do their own research. Tell us, what are you finding right now in Arizona? Give us some encouragement. We need some positivity. I mean, give us the truth, but give us something positive.
Yeah, so the president started over 100,000 votes down. He's now down just a little over 12,000 votes. And our understanding is there's still something like 30,000 votes still to count. So it's going to be tight, but still doable. The other thing is as you brought up the software, there is a common problem with the software. Maricopa County, which is the great state of Phoenix, actually uses the same software that Georgia did. It's called Dominion. Isn't it interesting that Las Vegas uses that same software as well? Isn't that interesting? That's what they use in Georgia. That's what was turned away in Texas, not once, not twice, but 3 times. That's what was used in Michigan. We're finding it all over the place. And there was a glitch found yesterday in Wisconsin with the apparatus of over 19,500 votes. These aren't glitches. These aren't glitches, Clay. These are embedded programs within that software.
The Dominion voting systems, which command more than 1/3 of the voting machine market, has hired lobbyists and high-powered lobbying firms that include a longtime aide to Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It just happens to work out that way. The Clinton Foundation, if you go on right now onto clintonfoundation.org, you can see them teaming up with the Dominion voting system. You can see this. They're not, it's like hidden in plain sight. It is very interesting. And you say, well, what does Smartmatic? Smartmatic is a company that also counts votes. What does Smartmatic and George Soros have in common? Lord Mark Malloch Brown is a board member on both organizations. And I could go on and on sharing this information, and I'm going to. I have right now, and I'll share this with you when we hop off. I have 14 pages of line item examples of fraud that listeners have sent in, video footage of fraud, people seeing their ballots, finding ballots in the trash. You're seeing people who, I guess some people who are pretty bold are actually filming themselves on TikTok throwing away people's ballots. Paul, what happens if you find somebody, let's just say that you found that I or somebody was throwing away somebody's ballots. How is that punishable currently under Arizona law? If you did find that somebody did, in fact, steal ballots, vote twice, and knowingly commit voter fraud, what sort of punishment is there?
It's a federal felony. I mean, it's an absolute felony to disrupt a ballot in the balloting process. So it's actually a felony.
A felony.
But here's the deal, Clay. Yeah. Why should anybody care? I mean, we've seen Washington, in my 10 years in Congress, we've seen Fast and Furious, Benghazi, the IRS, the unmasking of American citizens, the attacks on the press with James Rosen, James Risen, and Charles Atkinson. We saw the Hillary Clinton email scandal. We saw Russiagate, Ukrainegate, Obamagate, and now Bidengate. Who's paid the penalty? So no one fears the federal government. That's the key here. No one fears the law because everybody's exempt from the law. That's the problem here, is we got to get back to that law. It is important that one vote, every legal vote, should be counted. But that's not what's happening here.
So how I see the law, and tell me if you disagree on this, is you have a law, and when you put a law in place, you say, okay, the speed limit in Arizona, I'm making up a number, because the speed limit is this amount. The speed limit is 65. And by the way, what is the speed limit on your big highways? Are you 65? Are you a state that is 75? What can we?
75.
Okay, so let's say the speed limit is 75. And I know the speed limit is 75. So I do what most Americans do. I drive 79 because it feels a little bit over the limit, but not too far. Now, the police officer pulls me aside. I don't get a lot of tickets, by the way, but I have received a ticket before. The officer says, sir, do you know why I pulled you over? And I said, well, I was going 79 and a 75. If I get a ticket, if I have a consequence as a result of violating that law, I probably think twice about speeding again. But if the officer pulls me over and says, hey, you know, do you have any idea why I pulled you over? I say, yeah, I was going 79. He says, okay, good call. We'll see you later. Eventually, you just start to go, okay, well, I'll try to drive 85, 89, 97, 102. I think right now the corruption in government is going 102 miles an hour in a 75.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're going to have a day of reckoning. And I feel like it's going to have to go up to the Supreme Court. Can you walk us through the path to a Trump victory if the research is done and it finds that the 14 pages of cited examples of voter fraud are in fact correct? What is the path? How does that work? Just to kind of educate our listeners, what happens if we find that there's mass voter fraud through the software, through ballot harvesting, through whatever kind of corrupt jackassery there was? What's the path to victory for President Trump? How does that work? And will the Supreme Court get involved, or just kind of educate us?
Okay, so first of all, there's a difference between an accusation and an affidavit.
Got it.
An affidavit means that you're swearing by the perjury, by the incrimination of perjury, that you're actually witnessing this and you're putting that on the line. So if you're lying, you can be charged with perjury. So that's the big difference. So affidavits are bigger than just accusations. The courts have to take them and look at them very differently. Okay? So let's take, for example, Pennsylvania. We see voter dumping where hundreds of thousands of votes went to Joe Biden and none to Donald Trump. We had a pause. We have over 25,000 people in Maidengate that we actually saw women whose maiden names were actually used on ballot.
Wow.
We actually have tens of thousands of ballots that are actually received before they were sent. Let me tell you that again. We actually have postmarks of being received, these ballots, before they were actually sent.
Now, okay, so let's do it. I want to make sure listeners get this idea. On this document that I'm putting on the show notes, we have many, many people that are signing affidavits. They're saying, hey, I am not accusing anybody of anything. I am swearing under oath, essentially. And what happens if they sign an affidavit and they get found to be, if it is found they are lying? What happens to somebody who, just so we know the power of an affidavit?
Well, I mean, if you're me, you get convicted of a law, of perjury. If you're Mr. McCabe, you're probably not found guilty of perjury. But most of us, I guess I feel like I'm like the average person, would be charged with perjury, and we could do jail time.
And jail time's not a fun place to be this time of year, I understand. It's
No, probably not.
Now,
you go back to the postal fraud.
Yes, sir.
So the thing about it is, I want people to take this in. Votes were received before they were actually postmarked that they were sent. That tells you something, that there's rampant fraud here.
And Richard Hopkins is a postal worker in Erie, Pennsylvania, who has come out and has said, signed an affidavit, this is what happened.
Absolutely.
And so there are more and more people doing this. This is crazy. In Nevada, the GOP is saying they found over 3,000 instances of voter fraud. We're talking at this point, hundreds of affidavits are being signed. In many cases, some states, thousands of these are being signed. So this is This is powerful. This information that we're going over on today's show is going directly to Roger Stone and then to the Giuliani family, et cetera. So we're kind of getting this information up the chain. What do you feel like that Rudy Giuliani needs to know about fraud occurring in your state? What does he need to know?
Well, the number has to be big enough to make a difference. That's what you keep hearing today now, is that the difference, everybody's going to say now that there's fraud. I mean, they have to concede that. Now the issue becomes, is it paramount that it made a difference? So that's why what we're all looking for is that number. Okay, so for example, like in Arizona, let's say that the president, we run out of votes and the president is still down 10,000 votes. That's why I said, let's do a forensic audit. There's enough information here to show that we need to count by hand every paper ballot and then compare it against the machine. Otherwise, the ballot audit is just a number of ballots cast versus the machine. We got to tally each individual Republican, Democrat, or Libertarian vote and see how it matches up. The reason being is the algorithm that is built for the software, Dominion, seems to be set to skip over, so you don't find it all the time, changing Democrat or Republican votes to Democrat. That way, what you do is you get a differential in those vote counts that is different. That shows you a problem. So now what you do is you put that issue into question. And for example, in Pennsylvania, we got to get that election thrown out as bad as it is. Now, there's probably not time enough to do another vote. So then it becomes a problem is how do we certify this election? How do we go about that? I think if you go back, I think it's Rutherford B. Hayes. I may be wrong, but it's women in that general area. They could not verify the election. So therefore, the states in the union at that time, which were 30-something, actually presented one vote on the floor of the House of Congress, the House on Congress, and basically at the time, every state got one vote, and that vote was allocated based on who controlled the governor and the state houses. In this case, Rutherford B. Hayes won like 17-13 or 17-14, something like that. And in this case, that would be the same thing that happened here, except we have 50 states. And in this case, there are 27 Republican states. There are, I believe, 21 Democrats and 2 independent or neutral.
I want to make sure the listeners understand this, because if what you're saying were to be how it were decided, I believe President Trump would then win, if that is correct.
Yes.
And
that would.
And now the Dominion software, just so I want to hammer home this because I don't know that we have so many listeners. We have people in the White House that listen to this show, and I don't know if they know this or not. But the Dominion voting system, which is one of the dominating voting machine tabulator softwares out there, there is an election supervisor in Spalding County that said that the company uploaded something on November 2nd or the night before the election, which is not something that's ever done, and it caused a glitch. And we keep hearing this, and we keep seeing the Clintons are involved financially in the technology of Dominion. We keep seeing connections, and I can just tell you, I don't like social media. I have to use it to promote the show and other things. I don't like it. But it's very interesting that the president of our great United States, when he posts something on Twitter, that gets deleted and labeled as fraud, right? When he posts something on Facebook, they take it down. They say it's misinformation. It's dangerous. And the very same people that have made their algorithm to hide conservative thought, to punish conservative thought, these are the same people involved in the voting software. Paul, on the other end of this, when President Trump is found to be our president for 4 more years, do you feel like we're going to have to burn it down to the ground and find a new way to tabulate votes? Because it just seems like the very people that hate the conservative worldview the most are the ones making the software that tabulates the votes.
Yeah, well, I would go back to saying, we have that day off. It all ought to be paper. I mean, it's hard to, change that paper. It seems like the old way is the best way. And so from that step, that's where I would go. I want to bring you back to another point you made, Clay, and that is e-software. These software companies were reviewed by a Senate subcommittee last year. They found it 100% corruptible and with 100% ability to violate the results. 100%. Now, this isn't a partisan issue. So Jamie Raskin, probably one of the most liberal people out of Maryland, actually has brought this up, being very concerned about outcomes based upon these softwares. He actually introduced a bill to make sure that we had better oversight of these machines. Like, for example, who's the major interest in it? Where are these companies founded? Is there foreign money involved in it? And interestingly enough, Dominion was rejected 3 times. Not once, not twice, but 3 times by Texas. Wouldn't certify. Number 2, North Carolina had bids submitted for these machines. Dominion put their bid in, and when North Carolina came to them and said, yes, we have to find out who your investors are and where you're located, they withdrew their RFP. This is all the way through Georgia. So the numbers are not there. And that's why they want to get everybody to concede right away. We want a forensic count. Hand count those paper ballots and compare them against the ticker tape from the machine. You'll find a difference.
So we've got mail-in ballots. That's a problem. We've got ballot harvesting. Yep. That's a problem. We've got biased voting tabulation. That's a problem. This is us. I would like for you to explain this to the listeners because I don't think some of the listeners understand how this works. We now have reports that over 450,000 ballots have arrived in key swing states, and oddly enough, the person who voted only voted for Biden. They didn't vote for the rest of the ticket. They didn't say, I want to vote straight ticket for all the other Democrats. I'm an unusual individual that only wants to vote for Biden and Biden only. I'm a very busy man, very busy woman. All I have time to vote for is just the name Biden, and the rest of the ballot, I'm just going to leave that thing empty. I know it seems obvious to you. I think the average listener out there runs a business they want to. This is a business show. They only listen to the show to learn how to grow a business, so I'm interrupting their broadcast to educate them about what matters the most right now today. Can you please explain why it's irregular for somebody to only mark the name Biden and nothing else on a ballot?
Yes, and he saw a bunch that was just Biden and the Senate candidate as well, which is very odd. But here's the rationale. So when you have smaller populations, okay, like say state legislatures, which are much smaller realms of population, it's easier to find the misdeeds of a software package. The smaller the population, the more irregularities you pick up. So like, for example, in Arizona, we have 2 key cases. Our state legislature, which was Republican in the House and Senate, was going to get taken down and go Democrat. Millions of dollars were spent here. It didn't happen. So in 2 cases, let's say J.D. Mesnard, he outperformed the president by 7,000 votes. Another senator, 10,000 votes. When it was Trump, it carried him across the finish line. So now think about it. So 7,000 votes taken from Biden, going back to the president. Another district was 10,000 votes. So when you give 7,000 votes to Joe Biden, and it was rightly for the president, that's a 14,000 vote swing.
Wow.
Right now, the president's down less than 13,000. So in one district, they can offset that with that type of, so to speak, glitch. It's not a glitch. It's something that is built into the software.
So I want to make sure we get this. We've got the backdating of ballots. We've got mail-in ballot fraud. We've got backdating ballot fraud. We've got the mass trashing of ballot fraud. We've got a biased voting tabulation software fraud. The final area I want to tap into your wisdom.
The post office.
Yeah, we got the post office fraud. Yes, that is true. We have documented USPS fraud where the actual workers are just throwing away ballots. I want to ask you this here. Can you please explain in a way that our listeners can understand what is ballot harvesting? Because some people live in states where you can't do ballot harvesting, and some people live in a state like California where you can do ballot harvesting. Can you please explain what ballot harvesting is?
Yeah, so like, for example, in the state of Arizona, you can only be in possession of 2 votes at one time. Yours and maybe helping your family member. What they actually do in ballot harvesting is they go out to like the retirement homes, they go out to Section 8 housing, and what they do is they get these people to get their ballots. And what they do is they'll pay people X amount of dollars to sign these people up to register, and then collect their ballot, help them fill it out, and then they dump it all at the same time. So what they're doing is they're coercing. They're being paid to coerce somebody to change or put their information on the ballot and vote according to what they tell them, and then they take it and dump it in with the rest of the ballot.
And by the way, these senior citizens, a lot of times, they're in a kind of a compromised situation. I mean, if they're being pressured by somebody, and this is somebody who's supposed to care for them, I mean, this could be a very bad situation. Paul, capstone thought, then I'll let you get back to doing what you're doing, sir. What can all of our listeners do right now? What can all of our listeners do if they want to help support your efforts, if they want to help support the president they voted for? What can they do?
We want to demand a paper recount. We want what they call a forensic recount, where all the ballots are tabulated. All the ballots are tabulated against the ticker tape of these machines. Most states won't have this, okay? It's really conspicuous to the swing states, like Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. So what you want is if there's a question and the software is Dominion, we want a forensic paper count versus the ticker tape. Yes, it's going to cost some money, but it needs to be done if we're to be assured that we have trust in our election system. And Democrats shouldn't be against this. They should have one clarity as well. That it's a fair election, that everybody that casts a legal vote, it goes to the right person that they voted for.
Brother, I appreciate you, Paul, for being here. Congressman, I appreciate the work you're doing on a daily basis. And again, I know that when you get involved in politics, you get a lot of complaints, and probably very few thanks. So I want to tell you, thank you so much for fighting for the great people of these United States. And I appreciate you doing that. And should I find myself in Arizona with a cavity, I'm going to come find you, sir.
Well, don't tempt me. What I tell my dentist friends is don't give up your day job. You make everybody smile at the end of a procedure. I'm still trying to figure out how I make somebody smile with this job.
All right, you take care, my friend.
Say a prayer. Thank you.
And now, without any further ado, 3, 2, 1, boom!
If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. So just as I say, we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around. We aren't going to let any injunction turn us around.
Gotta pick a side, man, it's do or die. Trying to stay up in the middle, man, that's suicide. Be hot or be cold, what's it gonna be? Support me with loyalty, it's all I wanna see. If you ain't saying nothing, then you saying something. What you see is what you get, man, I ain't never frontin'. I say your problem, I'm lazy, cause I ain't never running. Opposition passing it off, cause they ain't never won it. Come on! Time to say goodbye, it is you and I.
When you compromise, it will multiply.
We ain't never scared to put it on the line.
It's time to pick a side, it's do or die.
Time to pick a side, homie, do or die.
When you compromise, it will multiply.
We ain't never scared to put it on the line.
It's time to pick a side, it's do or die. No mess, no backs for me. Both middle fingers up for Doc Fauci. I'm never gonna listen to his latest pitch or the scarf queen. His Dr. Brooks is up. I'm an American with the First Amendment and the Second Amendment to defend it. You want our guns? Well, come and take it. Hope you're good at dodging bullets and you're praying. The year 2020, the year of perfect vision. The time when you and I have to make a decision. Open up your minds like Hunter's laptop. But when you see corruption, this time it's gotta stop. Back the police, say no to the beast. No to the mask, take no vaccine. Back the police, say no to the beast. No to the mask, take no vaccine.
Time to say goodbye, it is you and I.
When you compromise, it will multiply.
We ain't never scared to put it on the line.
It's time to pick a side, it's do or die.
Time to pick a side, homie, do or die.
When you compromise, it will multiply.
We ain't never scared to put it on the line.
It's time to pick a side, it's do or die.
Come on.
If you compromise, it'll multiply. Treat you like a doormat, treat you speaking mine. Ain't hard to find, you must be blind if you can't see the sign. I got a spine, I won't never let them take what's mine. Time to unify, I'm talking you and I. If you ain't riding for the cause, better move aside. Sit back, watch me work, I'ma do it right. Time for you to pick a side, it's looking like a do or die. Time to say goodbye, it is you and I.
When you compromise, it will multiply.
We ain't never scared to put it on the line.
It's time to pick a side, it's do or die.
Time to pick a side, homie, do or die.
When you compromise, it will multiply.
We ain't never scared to put it on the line.
It's time to pick a side, it's do or die.
Our country will never be a socialist country. We're not going to let it happen.
And that is another lyrical miracle on the Thrive Time Show.